company dedicated to enhancing leaders' ability to harness and optimize trust as a strategic business asset. Anthony, one of the things that you've taught me in our conversations around trust is that trust is really a choice. It fully occurs in our minds, and it's really not a resulting behavior. Can we talk about that a little bit more and unpack that today?
Yeah, trust is a psychological state. It's occurring in our minds before we ever behave or change our behavior. And so, to define a psychological state, different types of psychological states could be our emotions or our feelings, even perceptions, thoughts, expectations that we have, beliefs, and intentions that we have. So there's different categories, I would say, of psychological states that we can consider, and trust is another one. So, but they interact with each other as well.
Yeah, and you talk about your psychological state and the emotions and the perceptions and the expectations that you have. And I think about that in the context of the environment we're living in right now and how quickly things are changing and moving. I mean, I remember a few years ago someone saying to me, the pace of change today is the slowest it will ever be. And I thought at the time, well, that can't be. That's not possible. But now you look forward and you realize it's absolutely true that change is really happening. So I think about that in terms of we're constantly recalculating in our environments. Am I trusting? Am I not in this environment? And we probably don't necessarily even recognize some of those things that we're doing in order to make that choice. Is that accurate?
I agree. It's happening involuntarily. Much of what we're doing, we think we're calculating our trust, but we're actually, there's a lot of things operating in the background. Like, how much is it me and my past experience, my formation that's leading to my trustingness versus I'm more calculating how trustworthy they are. I agree with that.
Yeah, it's kind of fascinating. We probably don't even recognize how much of that happens in our minds. What example would you have that help us sort of point to the fact that we really live in our minds?
Mm. Well, I like to think about Helen Keller, right? So Helen Keller had very limited ability or agency because she had limited senses that she could pull from to pull data from her external environment. So, right, she was blind. She was also deaf and mute. So, quite a few of her senses were restricted. And so she was pulling data about the external world from taste. And so Anne Sullivan, helped her experience the world through her limited senses. And so I like to think about her and how she in some sense she was so limited that she had to trust, like she was forced almost, but you can't be forced to trust. It has to be a choice. It has to be a free will choice. And so she was limited, but she chose to trust. And it was a beautiful relationship. And from what I understand, because of that, it was very intimate and deep. And there's a lot of trust involved in that relationship. So that's one that I like to think about. But Anne Sullivan also proved it seems to be a trustworthy target of her trust at the same time.
Yeah, that's fascinating to think of someone whose senses are very limited. And if maybe we take that example into the work environment, I feel like there's often this desire to trust, but maybe a fear to choose to trust in relationships where there's lack of communication, often from the leader down to employees, that there feels like there's a gap in that communication. And so they're going to choose not to trust. And what does that result in? It results in disengagement and lower levels of trust, of course, and loyalty. But perhaps it could be fixed with a choice to trust and to seek some of that communication to understand the difference between where we're at, where we're going. Oftentimes is what I see one of those nuances of I'm not choosing to trust because I'm not sure where we're going. And that gap in communication results in lower levels of trust.
I definitely can see that. That's a really great example. And the you think about the communication from a leader to one of their employees and how transparent they're being, how transparent that makes sense to be with them, and then how transparent the employee wants to receive information and to buy into the mission, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
So I wonder how often people really are stepping back to recognize trust is a choice, and we fully live in our minds, just like Helen Keller did.
Mhm. We definitely do. So we invite our listeners and viewers to also think about that. Think about how you consider trust, how you process that internally before you ever even behave in a trusting or distrusting kind of way. So we invite you to do that, to join the conversation, to ask us questions, to prompt comments. We definitely invite you to that conversation.